Thank you very much for taking the time to attend this global webinar. Just a couple of elements of housekeeping to start with. So hopefully you can see through the control panel that the presentation that I'll be giving today, as well as the white paper that we'll be talking about, are both available to download during or after the session. And also the second part, we'll be taking questions at the end. So if anything does pop into your mind during the presentation itself, please capture it within the chat function, and we'll be asking questions just after the presentation. So without further ado, my name's Tom Grahamslaw. I'm an associate within the Intelligent Transport Systems business within the UK. I am also the ITS Net Zero lead for the UK, and bringing those two elements together really put me in place to lead on the white paper that I'll be presenting on today, which really gives an insight to the role of ITS in supporting clients, supporting and enabling global ambitions to deliver net zero across transport. So the presentation today will cover 4 key parts. I'll set the context. I'll talk about the role of ITS in this particular space, give some examples, some project examples, and talk about some themes that ITS will be contributing to on the road to delivering net zero, and then look at some guiding factors which bring to life the ability to translate the theory into practice. So just to start with, I wanted to start by demystifying some of the terminology, make sure everybody's on the same page in terms of what it is we're talking about here. So starting with net zero. Net zero is all about striking a balance between greenhouse gas emissions going into the atmosphere and those being removed. Decarbonisation is the approach needed to achieve net zero. So that's about taking carbon dioxide out of the system. Decarbonising really does mean reducing that carbon dioxide across everything that we do. And you'll see how that translates into the transport sector during the presentation. So as we're all aware, our planet's warming at the fastest pace we've seen in our history, and really tackling the climate challenge that's currently in place requires urgent action. It requires that immediate and continued pace really to make a change to everything that we're doing across our entire livelihoods, across the communities that we live in. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, it's all about reducing those greenhouse gas emissions. And that's across all sectors. Transport, as you can see from the graph on the right hand side, the top graph, really has a big part to play in greenhouse gas emissions. It's the second highest emitter of all sectors globally. As you can see there, 10 to 15% of all global emissions are coming from transport, and that's really what the white paper looks to, that transport sector. And within that transport sector, we focus more on road transport, because as you can see, almost 75% of emissions are realised through road transport, be that passenger transport, so use of private motor cars, cycles, the use of buses and taxis, and also through that freight element, so trucks, lorries that use most of our road networks across the globe. And so it really is at the forefront of the challenge for governments, for policymakers, really to focus on decarbonising transport. And that's where we started our focus area. So we looked at the opportunity that ITS can bring in helping to decarbonise road transport and form pathways to meet those net zero ambitions that we all have. So what is the role of ITS? So just for those that don't know, ITS is Intelligent Transport Systems, and we talk about ITS as the means of integrating people, process, infrastructure, data, technology, and vehicles. And really what it is, it's a whole system approach to considering interventions that adapt transport networks to get the most out of each of those elements. And it's about taking each of those elements into consideration whenever we apply an intervention that's aimed at improving safety, making networks greener, or just generally improving the efficiency of mobility. It has evolved into quite a sophisticated approach, like the diagram on the right-hand side shows. Traditionally, people would associate ITS with purely technology, traffic signals and things like that, but it really has adapted over the years to mean so much more. And as we are aware with digital transformation across the globe, the technology is an enabler to much greater things, and ITS reflects that. The other element that ITS brings is that ability to give attention to the setting, the place, and really bringing out the needs of people. And it offers opportunity from a decarbonisation perspective to whether that's looking at influencing travel patterns and demand, reducing congestion, or facilitating more efficient use of existing networks. And it does pave the way for greener mobility, as we'll get onto in a little while. So within the white paper, we started to look at breaking down the decarbonisation of transport into themes, and themes that ITS could have an impact upon. And we drew out 3 key areas that we felt were most important in this particular space. Number 1 being making most efficient use of existing transport networks. I think it's recognised that building more is quite a carbon intensive activity. And so what we looked at was the ability to use or make better use of data, use technology, increase our use of connectivity to make more efficient use of the assets that we currently have. And we've got some examples in a little while to showcase what we're doing in that particular space. Theme number 2 was all about looking at how ITS can influence modal shift, be that to public transport or to active modes, walking, cycling, etc. Those modes typically associated with lower carbon emissions, be that rail, or be eliminating carbon emissions through walking and cycling. And then the final theme was around adoption of zero emission vehicles and the role that ITS can play in contributing to that increased uptake. And therefore, with EVs, you've got that typical reduction in tailpipe emissions, elimination in most cases. So if we take the first theme, maximising efficiency across existing networks, traditionally across the globe, we've seen a build-up of personal car ownership, and that comes with increased congestion. More and more people are using vehicles on their own, and therefore, the sheer volume of traffic has led to poor traffic flows, stop-start movement of traffic, especially during peak periods. And that does lead to increased fuel consumption, that stop-start traffic, and therefore increased GHG emissions. Like I mentioned, building more infrastructure is one way to deal with that, but not necessarily the most efficient from a carbon perspective. And we look at the embodied carbon in a lot of the materials that are typically used on road transport systems, the concrete, the steel, and they're very, very heavy in carbon from an embodied perspective. And so what we looked at within the paper is how ITS can allow for a different way of looking at making more efficient use. So like I mentioned before, better use of data. So really allowing policymakers, allowing decision makers to look at what's happening on their networks, be that through sensor data, be that through traffic counts, bringing that data into decision making at the earliest possible stage allows more accurate decisions for adapting existing networks. You then start looking at technology, and a great example on the right hand side there is some technology that was used in Hong Kong around tolls. Traditionally toll booths were positioned at the start or end of a tunnel, and they would collect the money, but that would result in tailbacks, a huge amount of people having to stop, typically find their wallet or their purse and pay for the toll. It creates all of that backlog, that stop-start traffic, again, as we referred to at the beginning. Introducing technology in this case allowed that toll collection to be automated, and therefore didn't require anyone to be stopping at the start or end of the tunnel, and therefore increased that throughput, that smoothing of traffic through the tunnel, and therefore reduced the impact from a carbon emission perspective through making more efficient use of that asset. And then there are other aspects around connectivity. So if we look to the future and think around connected autonomous vehicles, we should be able to run vehicles closer together. If we consider platooning, that drives more fuel efficient transit of HGVs, the large trucks, and also takes away some of that driver error, some of that heavy braking, some of that stop-start traffic that typically results from driver error as well. Moving on to theme number 2, so we looked at how ITS could facilitate modal shifts to public and active transport. And this is all about really looking at how, again, we can make better use of data, how we can inform the public using that data with better information on the condition of networks, be that traffic flows, how transport networks are operating at that particular time, to give better pre-journey information, to make more informed decisions before people set out on their journeys. Also within journey, you're able to provide better information through that data for people to make more informed decisions whilst they're making the journey itself. So it may be that they don't take the car for the full journey, but they drive to the local public transport interchange and are able to move on to public transport to complete their journey if congestion's particularly high on a section of their route. But also ITS connects people with new modes of transport. So if we look on the right hand side here, it was about connecting people with spaces that allowed the use of innovative methods such as micro-mobility, maximizing the value from the curbside, in this particular instance in Australia and New Zealand. Creating that space, providing that connectivity through apps with the data, the connectivity through Internet of Things, sensors, etc., just creates a better space for people to use and promotes more innovative modes, more active modes of transport, because people are made aware of them and people can see how that's a more efficient use of their time and reduces time taken to make particular journeys. Finally, the ITS role around the adoption of zero emission vehicles. So ITS really brings in the role of encouraging adoption. I think one of the challenges that people have in adopting electric vehicles, for instance, is range anxiety. And what ITS does is it brings that connectivity, connects people to the infrastructure through in-vehicle systems. It allows people to plan their journeys more effectively, so they can see that making a particular journey will take X miles and there is Y infrastructure in place to allow them to charge, to make that journey without the concern of running out of electricity, fuel to make that journey in one hit. Takes out the stress of the journey. It starts to break down some of those barriers by connecting people with that infrastructure, breaking down those barriers to people's ability to be confident in the technology. And it's a project we did within Midlands Connect within the UK. It was all about looking at the infrastructure across the region. How can we best facilitate that uptake of electric vehicles by providing a system that meant that it eliminated some of those concerns, some of those blockers to uptake of electric vehicles. Again, all around that data, technology and connectivity angle. So a few examples there, many more examples within the white paper. So I really would encourage you to go through and have a look at some of the wider examples that we brought in from across the globe. But those are just a few examples, and I think it's worth recognizing that each geography, each region within the globe faces different challenges, and therefore the solution that will be applied to those particular challenges will vary. But I think what is consistent is the principles, the framework, what we've called guiding factors, to moving from some great opportunities to actually delivering benefits on the ground. And within the white paper, we've set out a number of opportunities for policymakers, for what we call system designers. So all of those people that are involved in making decisions around the transport system. We've provided some guiding factors to how to take those opportunities that ITS brings and start to embed them in strategy, start to embed them into plans, and start to deploy some of the initiatives on the ground. And there are three key areas within this space within the white paper. So first of all, we look at the whole system approach. And the whole system approach is something that has gained a lot of traction within the ITS sector over the last few years. And it's about recognizing that there are many factors, like we showed on the circle diagram at the beginning, many factors to the transport system. And it's about looking at the interdependencies and the interfaces between those elements of the transport system when making a decision. And it's about considering all aspects of that system to make sure that no negative unintended consequences result from any decisions that are made. We've moved away from that technology first approach to considering what the outcome is we're trying to achieve and how we best get to that outcome, considering all of those aspects. And that whole system approach really does encompass that. Second one is adaptability. I think it's widely recognized that some solutions that we start with on projects, some solutions that we develop to address a particular challenge, to deliver a particular outcome, will need to adapt over time. And ITS is no different to this. And when you start to think about data and technology and connectivity, those are all changing at such a pace that we need to be adapting what we apply to a particular challenge across its life cycle, but also how we adapt at different stages within the life cycle of a particular project and the solutions that we implement to address the challenges at different stages in the life cycle. The other element talked about in the white paper in this particular section, as well as the circular economy, and making sure that we're considering circular economy, so the reuse, recycling, all of those aspects within decisions that we make throughout the life cycle of an asset, throughout the life cycle of a particular transport project. And finally, just one thing that I wanted to leave you with in your minds, and probably the most important element to everything that we've talked about within this white paper and within the presentation, is really the human-centric approach and putting people at the heart of both the challenge and the solution. It's really important to understand people's perspective in this particular global challenge that we've got with net zero and the decarbonisation of transport, because ultimately things won't change unless people change with it. We can encourage, we can promote things, we can put policies in place, but unless people adopt those, unless people change the way that they've done things and adapt to the new ways of any system, then things won't be a success. Just wanted to leave you on that particular thought. And thank you very much for your time. And I think we've got time now for questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Tom, for a fantastic presentation. So before moving into the Q&A period, I would like to remind attendees to enter your questions in the question box on the GoToWebinar platform. And also, like Tom mentioned, you can download the PDF version of the presentation, including the white paper from the handout box on the dashboard. I will start with the first question. What is the biggest challenge we face in delivering net zero ambitions?
Yeah, good question. So I think it's taking it back to that people element, like I've just mentioned. So putting people at the heart of it is going to be the most important thing. And I see people not adopting or not embracing change as probably being the biggest challenge. I think there's skepticism around the globe, albeit most people do understand that the climate emergency is real, and we need to tackle this. But I think the recognition of needing to do something and then physically changing the way that we live, changing the way that we use transport, we use mobility, it is another thing. And therefore I see the biggest challenge really being people and people's ability to change.
Thank you. Do you think net zero is achievable in the transport sector?
Yes, I think it is. I think it is. And I think it's not going to be delivered by one particular aspect. Hence, we identified within the white paper 3 key themes. We'll have to make some small changes. We'll have to make some significant changes. But I think as a collective of measures that we talk about, so making more efficient use of what we have, taking out the carbon emissions, excuse me, from vehicles, moving to EVs, and then a shift to more sustainable modes really will contribute to delivery of net zero.
Thank you. The next question is decarbonizing transport reliant on other sectors?
It is. It can't be done in isolation. So the best example there really is, electric vehicles. It would be all well and good moving, an entire fleet to electric rather than petrol or diesel, the internal combustion engine. But unless that energy, that electricity is produced from sustainable sources, you're not achieving the ultimate outcome that you're looking to achieve. So it is reliant on other industries. There are a whole host of interdependencies, and that's why within the paper we talk about this whole system approach. It's thinking wider than just the decision that you're making. It's thinking about that whole system.
Thank you. Do you have an example of ITS being brought into a client's strategic approach to decarbonizing transport?
Yes, a recent example actually within the UK. So we've done some work with National Highways, who operate and maintain the strategic road network, so that the motorways, the big A roads within the UK. We did a project called Digital Roads, and we developed their digital roads vision, which was looking at a digital transformation of the entire life cycle of the strategic road network in the UK, from design and construction all the way through to customers' use of the road network. And what came from that were three elements that really were embedded into everything that they did as part of, or everything that they will do as part of this transformation, and that was data, technology, and connectivity. And I'd say those 3 elements are as relevant to digital roads as they are to the ITS environment. And what you'll find within the digital roads vision is a lot of what can be considered ITS interventions. So a lot of use of roadside technology, longer term integration of connected autonomous vehicles, use of vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to everything connectivity. And ITS sort of ran through the entire digital roads vision as a layer. Wasn't explicitly recognized as ITS, but really does demonstrate that ITS is at the heart of the future of the transport system. And one of the components of digital roads was all about looking at how that digital transformation could act as an enabler to decarbonising, and some of the themes that we brought out in the white paper recognise that as well. And digital roads is in there as a case study for people to read a bit more information on.
Thank you. There is a comment here and a question. People mostly use what is offered to them. What about big corporations that offer some options that are not net zero friendly, like remote car starters, how to approach them to change?
It's a great question. And I think a really important point as well. I think what we're looking at here is probably a two-pronged approach. You know, as individuals, we need to take a long, hard look at the way that we are living, how we're working, and make small changes to our lifestyles and make more informed decisions. So I think I'd encourage people, you know, even if you don't know much about the topic, read around it, you know, listen to the news. There are things we can do in our own personal lives to make a change. And us making a change will influence the products, the solutions that these large corporations offer us. You know, if we're not accepting certain products because we're more environmentally conscious, then these companies will stop providing those services or stop producing those products. I think the other angle to this is policy, so almost a top-down approach rather than a bottom-up approach. And that policy really is about governments being stronger in the commitments that they make and the actions that they take. You know, those policies really can be influential in driving companies down a more sustainable route, challenging companies when they provide solutions and products that don't align with the longer term aspirations of what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you. I will take the last question. What is the most important intervention to decarbonizing transport brought by ITS?
Great question. I think there's two parts to this. I think from a short-term perspective, I think electrification of fleet and breaking down those barriers to the uptake of electric vehicles will be key. And obviously that comes hand in hand with, like I mentioned, you know, a more sustainable energy source. So using sustainable means to provide that electricity to power the vehicles. But I think ITS breaking down some of those barriers, you know, connecting people with the infrastructure, building that confidence in use of a new propulsion means. But linking that then with the longer term connectivity and automation of vehicles, not necessarily at a personal vehicle level, but also that automation of mobility as a service, that automation of public transport, that connectivity between personal use of maybe first last mile journeys and the longer journey element of the typically we would use public transport for rail, etc., etc. And it's about joining all of that up together. And I see ITS being the significant enabler to creating that holistic vision for the future of transport that brings everything together, makes it easier to use, makes people's journeys easier and decision making easier to move down a more sustainable means of future mobility.
Fantastic, thank you. So we're at the end of our webinar session. Please feel free to follow up directly with Tom via the contact details shown on the screen. And I would like to thank all attendees for joining today. Thank you for your time. We hope you will enjoy reading the white paper. And thank you, Tom, for a fantastic presentation.
Thank you very much, Sharon.
Thank you.